The desperate decision. Zira clutched her child tightly against her chest. The dim lights of the marketplace flickered above her, casting long shadows on the cracked ground. The air smelled of metal, smoke, and something rotten. She pulled her hood lower, hiding her face from the watching eyes of the traders, bounty hunters, and criminals. She had no choice. Her son, Kale, was getting weaker every day. His small body burned with fever, his breaths shallow and slow. She had tried everything, begging, stealing, even searching for old scraps of medicine in abandoned buildings. Nothing worked. If she didn't get help soon, she would lose him. And so, Zara made the hardest decision of her life. She would sell herself, not as a worker, not as a servant. No one paid for her kind. The only buyers interested in her were the ones who wanted test subjects for experiments, gladiators for deadly games, or worse, pleasure slaves. A shiver ran down her spine, but she forced herself to move forward. She stepped into the auction house, a place filled with the desperate and the cruel. Metal cages lined the walls, holding creatures from different planets. Some growled, some cried, some stared at nothing, already broken. A tall, insect-like alien with 6 arms and cold, black eyes stood behind a raised platform. He was the auctioneer, Vorgus the dealer. Zira had heard stories about him. He didn't care about lives. He only cared about profit. She approached him, holding Cal close. "I want to make an offer." Her voice was steady, but inside, she was shaking. Vorgus looked at her, then at the child in her arms. His mandibles clicked. "You are not valuable." Zira swallowed her fear. "I will do anything. Work, fight, even experiments. Just give me enough credits for medicine." Vorgus laughed, a dry, chittering sound. "Experiments? Maybe. But you are weak. Sickly. Worthless." He tilted his head, considering. "Unless." She held her breath. "Unless you offer something more." Vorgus leaned in. "A permanent sale. No escape. No freedom. Your body, your mind, everything belongs to the buyer." Her heart pounded. This was it. She felt Cal's weak breath against her neck. He would live. That was all that mattered. "Fine," she whispered. "Do it." Vorgus grinned and turned toward the crowd. He clapped his upper hands, signaling the start of the auction. "Attention, buyers, a rare offer tonight. A mother willing to give herself completely. No complaints, no escape, only obedience." A murmur spread through the audience. Zira kept her face blank as eyes turned to her, judging, calculating. Some faces showed interest, others disgust. A gray-skinned alien with sharp teeth raised his hand. "I'll take her for my fighting pits. She looks weak now, but a little pain will make her strong." A fat, slug-like creature let out a wet laugh. "No, no. I'll take her for my pleasure house. Soft skin, rare species. My customers will pay high for her." Zara felt bile rise in her throat, but she stood still. She had made her choice. Then, another voice cut through the crowd. "Stop the auction." The room fell silent. A figure stepped forward, moving through the buyers with calm confidence. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't scaled, armored, or covered in mechanical parts. He was human. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp eyes, he walked toward the stage. He wore a long coat, and at his waist was a holstered plasma pistol. Vorgus clicked his mandibles. "And who are you, human?" The man ignored him. Instead, he looked straight at Zira. "Do you want this?" he asked. His voice was steady, serious. She hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. No one had ever cared. "I have no choice," she whispered. The human's jaw tightened. He turned back to Vorgus. "How much?" Vorgus laughed. "You think you can buy her? She is already up for auction." The human pulled out a credit chip and tossed it on the table, double the highest bid. "Right now." A murmur ran through the crowd. The buyers looked angry. The gray-skinned fighter spat on the ground. The slug-like alien hissed in displeasure. Vorkis hesitated. I don't. The human's hand moved to his pistol. Do we have a deal? Vorkis clicked his mandibles, annoyed. Fine. She's yours. Zura's breath caught in her throat. Just like that. It was over. The human stepped forward, reaching out a hand. Come with me, he said. You're free now. She stared at him, unsure. Could she trust him? Was this just another trick? But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before. Kindness. She took his hand, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. The mysterious human. Zyra followed the human through the dark alleys of the marketplace, Kale still clutched tightly in her arms. The neon lights flickered overhead, reflecting off the wet ground. Shadows twisted around them, and she could feel the eyes of the other traders, criminals, and slaves watching. She had been bought, but for what purpose? The human walked ahead of her, his steps calm, his posture relaxed, but she noticed his hand never strayed far from the weapon at his side. He was dangerous, that much was clear. But danger was nothing new to her. What confused her was his kindness. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. No one had ever stopped an auction for someone like her. Finally, she broke the silence. Why did you do that? Her voice was quiet but firm. The human stopped. He turned to look at her, his sharp brown eyes studying her face, because it was the right thing to do. She frowned. That doesn't make sense. No one does things for free. The man sighed, shaking his head as if he had expected her to say that. Maybe where you come from. He gestured toward a small docking bay ahead. Come on. You'll be safer on my ship. Zira hesitated. Safer. That word had meant nothing to her for years. But Kale stirred in her arms, his body burning with fever. She didn't have the luxury of doubt. She followed. The Nova Dawn. The ship was sleek and powerful, unlike the rusting, broken ships she had seen before. As they stepped inside, cool, clean air surrounded her. No stench of rot, no smoke clogging her lungs. The walls gleamed, lined with blinking control panels. A voice suddenly echoed around them. New life forms detected. Welcome aboard the Nova Dawn. Zira tensed, looking around. The human chuckled. Relax. That's just the ship's eye. Name's Luna. A soft, feminine voice responded. I am more than just a ship, Captain Carter. I am an advanced artificial intelligence with superior processing abilities. Zira blinked. She had heard of AIs before, but only the kind used by slavers to control prisoners. This one sounded almost friendly. The human, Captain Carter, walked toward the control panel and pressed a few buttons. Luna, scan the kid. See what we're dealing with. A soft blue light washed over Kale. Zira instinctively held him tighter. Medical analysis complete, Luna announced. The child is suffering from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and an advanced bacterial infection. Without treatment, survival probability is less than 20%. Zira's chest tightened. She already knew he was dying, but hearing the exact probability made it feel more real. Can you cure him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause. Then Luna spoke again. Yes, human medical technology is advanced enough to reverse his condition. Administering treatment now. A robotic arm extended from the ceiling, a small injector at its tip. Zyra took a step back, but Carter placed a hand on her shoulder. It's all right, he said. Trust me. She didn't trust him, but she had no choice. The injector released a cool mist over Kale's skin, followed by a soft hiss as medicine entered his bloodstream. He stirred slightly, but his breathing seemed steadier. The fever wasn't gone, but it wasn't getting worse. Zira exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. Carter leaned against the control panel, arms crossed. Because your people don't deserve what's happening to them. And because I've seen too many good people lost to this galaxy's cruelty. Zira frowned. My people. Carter studied her for a moment, then walked over to a side console. With a few taps, a hologram appeared, her planet, or at least, what was left of it. Zura's breath caught in her throat. The once green landscapes were now covered in blackened scars. Smoke rose from destroyed cities. Ships circled the skies like vultures. Enemy forces tightening their grip. The Yelthran Empire, Carter said grimly. They'd been raiding your world for years, turning your people into slaves, test subjects, or worse. They don't see you as equals. They see you as property. Zura's hands curled into fists. She had lived through that nightmare, but she hadn't known it was this bad. Carter continued. Most people ignore it. No one wants to fight the Yelthrans. They have power, weapons, and enough influence to make any resistance disappear. He turned to face her. But I don't care about that. I help those who need it. Zura shook her head. That's suicide. He grinned. Maybe. But I've done dumber things. She stared at him, trying to understand. This human was insane. Or maybe, just maybe, he was something else. Something she had never encountered before. A human who actually cared. A new chance. Zira sat in the Nova Dawn's medbay, watching over Kale as he slept. His breathing was stronger now, his fever finally fading. The human medicine was working, faster than she had ever imagined. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside her. But that hope came with fear. She didn't understand Captain Carter. No one helped her kind without a price. Yet he had spent a fortune to buy her just to set her free. Why? Was this a trick? Was he hiding something? Zura's fingers tightened around the edges of her tattered cloak as she listened to the low hum of the ship's systems. Everything inside this vessel was too clean, too advanced, too human. The door slid open. She tensed, instinctively shifting to shield Kale. But it was Carter. He paused, watching her. Relax. I'm not here to hurt you. She said nothing. He sighed and took a slow step forward. I have food in the mess hall. You should eat. Zura hesitated. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she didn't move. Carter studied her for a moment, then leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. All right. Let's talk then. I figure you have a lot of questions. She did. Too many. But she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of asking them outright. Instead, she narrowed her eyes. What do you want from me? Carter exhaled sharply, as if he had expected that question. Nothing. Lies. Zira snapped. No one helps for nothing. Especially not humans. Carter's jaw tightened. Not all humans are the same. She scoffed. I've seen what humans do when they come to the outer colonies. They take what they want. If they don't, they buy it. So tell me, Captain, what did you just buy? Carter stared at her for a long moment. Then he pushed himself off the wall. Come with me. Zira hesitated, but she was tired of wondering. She needed to know. She followed him through the sleek metal halls of the Nova Dawn, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Eventually, they reached a large room with holographic screens lining the walls. Maps, star charts, and flashing red warning symbols filled the space. In the center of it all was a hologram of her planet. She froze. Carter turned to face her. You asked what I want. Here's your answer. He pressed a button, and the hologram zoomed in on a hidden colony, deep in the ruins of her homeworld. A small group of her people, survivors, barely hanging on. These are the last of your kind that haven't been captured or killed, Carter said. They're hiding. Running out of food. Running out of time. Zara's heart pounded. She knew about the hidden colony. She had tried to reach them once but failed. They won't last another month, Carter continued. Not with the Yelthran Empire closing in. Zira clenched her fists. So you plan to save them? That's the idea, he said casually. She narrowed her eyes. Why? What do you gain from this? Carter's expression hardened. I lost my crew to the Yelthrans. His voice was quiet, but there was fire behind it. I've seen what they do. I've seen what they turn people into. Zira inhaled sharply. She had seen it too. Entire families ripped apart, people experimented on, bodies discarded like waste. Carter turned back to the hologram. Your people aren't warriors. They don't stand a chance alone. But I can get them out. Zira stared at him, searching for deception, for hidden motives. But she found none. Only conviction. Her throat tightened. And if I help you, what happens after? Carter met her gaze. Then you and your people get a second chance. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But belief was dangerous. She folded her arms. What's the plan? Carter grinned. Now you're speaking my language. The plan. Carter pulled up a blueprint of a Yelthran supply ship. This is our way in, he explained. A convoy is heading toward your planet in 3 days. They'll have food, medicine, and most importantly, security clearance to land without suspicion. Zira studied the blueprint. You're going to steal a Yelthran ship. Correction, Carter said. We're going to steal a Yelthran ship. She blinked. We? Carter smirked. You know the terrain. You know where your people are hiding. And I need someone on the inside who can pass as a captive. Zira frowned. You want me to pretend I'm a slave? Carter's smile faded. I know it's not ideal. But it's our best shot. Once we're past security, we get to the surface, evacuate your people, and get the hell out before the Yelthrans know what hit them. Zira looked at the hologram again. This was insane. A suicide mission. But what choice did she have? She had seen her people sold, beaten, broken. She had nearly given herself up to the same fate. Now she had one chance to fight back. She turned to Carter. I'm in. The hidden truth. The Nova Dawn drifted through space, its engines humming softly as it approached the edge of the Yelthran-controlled sector. The stolen ship plan was bold. Too bold. Zira knew from experience. Plans like these rarely ended well. Yet, here she was, standing beside a human who had risked everything to help her. It didn't make sense. Humans weren't supposed to be like this. Carter stood in front of the holographic battle map, scanning through ship movements, enemy patrols, and docking schedules. His expression was unreadable, but Zira had spent her entire life reading people. Something wasn't right. You've done this before, she said, watching him. Carter didn't look up. Done what? She crossed her arms. Infiltrated Yelthran ships. Broken into their networks. You know how they think. That's not normal. This time, he glanced at her, a smirk forming. You're pretty observant. She ignored the compliment. Who are you, Carter? The smirk faded. A moment of silence passed before he turned back to the console. I used to work for them. Zira's blood ran cold. Her instincts screamed at her to run. Her kind had only ever known 2 types of humans, the ones who ignored their suffering, and the ones who profited from it. You were a Yelthran officer, she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Carter let out a low laugh. Hell no. I was a contractor, freelance pilot, did a few jobs moving cargo, didn't ask questions. Zira's jaw clenched. She knew what cargo meant in Yelthran hands. You were transporting slaves. Carter exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, I was young, stupid, and blind to what was really going on. Then one day, I actually looked inside one of the crates. Zira didn't breathe. Carter's eyes darkened. There was a girl inside. Not much older than Kel. She was barely alive. And I realized, I wasn't just moving cargo. I was delivering people to their deaths. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Zira said, and now you think saving me will make up for it. Carter's jaw tightened. No, I know I'll never erase what I did. But if I can stop them, even a little, then maybe I can live with myself. Zira studied him, searching for lies. There were none. For the first time, she saw him for what he truly was, not just a human, not just a rogue pilot, but someone who had seen the worst of the galaxy and chose to fight back. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. She exhaled. Let's get this over with. The infiltration begins. The stolen Yelthran transport ship was a rusting, dented vessel, barely holding together. It was perfect. No one would suspect a high-risk infiltration team hiding inside a ship that looked like scrap metal. Zira sat in the darkened cargo bay, her wrists bound with fake iron cuffs. The role of a captured slave wasn't difficult to play. She had spent most of her life in chains. Carter wore a stolen Yelthran officer's uniform. It didn't fit him perfectly. Too broad in the shoulders, too human. But in the dim light of the docking bay, it would pass. He crouched beside her, fastening the hidden plasma blade beneath her sleeve. If things go south, use this. Zira smirked. If things go south, I won't need a knife. Carter chuckled. I'm starting to believe that. The ship trembled as it entered the Yelthran flagship's docking bay. Through the small window, Zira saw rows of armored guards waiting outside. Their reptilian faces were unreadable, but their weapons were very clear. This was it. If they failed, they wouldn't just die. They'd be made into an example. A metallic voice crackled over the ship's speakers. Transport Vessel 047, state your cargo and purpose. Carter pressed the comms button. His voice was cold, authoritative. Prisoner transfer. One captured Runari for interrogation. Orders from High Command. A pause. Then, confirmed. Proceed. The docking clamps engaged with a loud hiss. Zira's heart pounded as the ramp lowered, revealing the massive interior of the Yelthran battleship. The air was thick with oil, smoke, and blood. Carter gripped her arm, too tight, making the act convincing. He pulled her forward, marching her past the guards. She kept her head low, her breathing steady. Every step was a gamble. One wrong move, and they were dead. A massive Yelthran officer stepped forward, scanning them with his glowing red eyes. His armor was heavier than the others, his clawed hands twitching at his belt. He glanced at Zira, then at Carter. This the prisoner? Carter nodded. She was hiding among the refugees. High Command wants her personally interrogated. The officer sneered. A Runari. They're weak. You should have killed her already. Carter shrugged. Orders are orders. The officer grunted, then turned toward Zira. His forked tongue flickered out, tasting the air. She smells of fear. His eyes gleamed. I like that. Zira forced herself to stay silent, to stay still. This wasn't the time to fight. Not yet. The officer turned back to Carter. Take her to interrogation block 3. And tell your men to make it painful. Carter's grip on Zira's arm tightened. He gave a stiff nod. Understood. Then, without another word, he led her deeper into the ship. The moment they turned a corner, Zira let out the breath she had been holding. That was close. Carter didn't respond. His eyes were scanning the halls, calculating their next move. They had infiltrated the ship. Now came the hard part. They had to steal the access codes, locate the hidden colony, and escape before the entire fleet realized what was happening. And time was running out. The rescue mission begins. The cold steel halls of the Yelthran battleship seemed to close in around Zira as she walked beside Carter, her fake shackles digging into her wrists. Every step echoed in the dim corridors, the weight of 100 unseen eyes pressing down on her. They had made it past the first checkpoint, but the hardest part was still ahead. Stealing the access codes, finding her people, getting out alive. Carter marched her toward interrogation block 3, his grip firm but careful, enough to sell the act, but not enough to hurt. Zira forced herself to breathe steadily. Fear made people sloppy. Fear got people killed. A pair of Yelthran guards flanked the entrance to the interrogation wing, their reptilian faces unreadable beneath dark helmets. One of them tilted his head at Carter. This the prisoner? Carter gave a curt nod. High Command wants her processed immediately. The second guard grunted. Room 7 is open. Your unit can handle the interrogation there." Zira almost frowned. This wasn't the plan. Carter had expected to hand her off and then slip away to steal the security codes. But now they were being forced deeper inside the facility. His fingers twitched at his side. A subtle signal. Change of plans. She understood. They'd have to improvise. The guards opened the door to room 7, and Carter shoved Zira inside, following behind her. The interrogation chamber was bare metal, dimly lit, with a single chair bolted to the floor. Chains hung from the ceiling, rusted and stained. The door slid shut behind them. The sound of the automatic lock engaging made Zira's stomach twist. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Carter exhaled sharply and pulled out his hidden plasma blade. "All right," he muttered. "That was way too easy." Zira shot him a glare. "We're locked in an interrogation room. How is this easy?" Carter smirked, kneeling to inspect the control panel near the door. "Because if they really thought we were a threat, we'd already be dead." Zira folded her arms. "So what's the next part of your brilliant plan?" Carter popped open a panel in the wall, revealing a tangle of wires and circuits. "Give me a few minutes. I can patch into the ship's mainframe from here." Zira frowned. "That's not how Yelthrin security works." Carter grinned. "That's how human hacking works." He pulled a small, sleek device from his belt and plugged it into the exposed wires. It flickered to life, displaying streams of alien code on a holographic screen. Zira's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" Carter winked. "Stole it from a guy who owed me money. Guess you won't be needing it back." Zira huffed. "Humans." The screen flashed as Carter navigated through the ship's systems. "All right, let's see what we've got. Prisoner logs, crew rotations, ship inventory. Ah, there we go. Security clearance codes." He pressed a button, and a small data chip ejected from the device. He caught it in his palm. "One stolen clearance code, as requested," he said, tucking it into his pocket. "Now we just need to get off this ship and back to the Novadawn." Zira's relief was short-lived. A sharp alarm suddenly blared through the ship. Carter's smirk vanished. "Oh." Zira's pulse quickened. "What did you do?" Carter tapped the screen. The holographic text flickered, displaying a flashing red warning. ALERT. Unauthorized access DTKCTD. Security teams deployed. Carter cursed. "Guess they noticed us." Zira clenched her fists. "We need to move. Now." The door suddenly slammed open. A squad of Yelthrin soldiers stormed in, plasma rifles raised. Zira and Carter barely had a second to react before a familiar voice echoed from behind them. "Going somewhere." Zira turned, and her heart froze. Commander Xylox. The towering Yelthrin officer stepped forward, his red eyes gleaming with amusement. His black armor was adorned with silver spikes, and a cruel smile stretched across his reptilian face. "I thought I recognized that scent," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking the air. "You've been causing quite the disturbance, little Runari." Zira forced herself to stay calm. "Commander Xylox, I should have guessed you'd be here." Xylox chuckled. "And I should have guessed you'd still be running like a frightened child." His gaze flicked to Carter. "And you," Xylox sneered, "are an interesting addition. A human, playing hero." He stepped closer, inspecting Carter with curiosity. "Do you even know what you're saving?" Carter's jaw tightened. "Someone who deserves better than this." Xylox laughed. "How noble, how utterly pointless." He gestured to his soldiers. "Take them to the holding cells. I want to see how long their bravery lasts." The guard stepped forward. Carter met Zira's gaze. Now or never. Without warning, Carter grabbed the nearest guard, slamming his elbow into its throat. The soldier choked, stumbling back. Zira lunged, twisting her hidden plasma blade free from her sleeve. In one swift motion, she slashed through her restraints and drove the weapon into another guard's neck. Chaos erupted. Blaster fire filled the room. Zara and Carter moved as one, ducking, striking, dodging. Carter fired a stolen plasma pistol, while Zara weaved through the enemies with deadly precision. But Tylox didn't move. He simply stood there, watching, smiling. That's when Zara realized this was too easy. A trap. A crackling energy field suddenly erupted around them, slamming them both to the floor. Zara's muscles seized, electricity surging through her veins. She gasped, her vision blurring. Carter let out a sharp curse, struggling against the invisible force pinning them down. Xylox chuckled, stepping forward. "Oh, did you think I wouldn't prepare for you, little fugitives?" He crouched beside Zara, gripping her chin between two clawed fingers. "You're not running this time," he whispered. Zara glared at him, even as pain racked her body. Xylox leaned in. "Welcome home." The battle for freedom. Pain. Electricity crackled through Zara's veins as she lay on the cold metal floor, her body paralyzed by the energy field. Carter groaned beside her, his muscles twitching as he fought against the same invisible force. Commander Xylox watched them struggle, his red eyes gleaming with amusement. "Foolish," he murmured, crouching beside Zara. "Did you really think you could walk onto my ship and steal from me?" Zara forced her body to breathe through the pain. Her fingers twitched. Slowly, carefully. Her hidden plasma blade was still in her sleeve, just out of reach. Xylox tilted his head. "I've been hunting your kind for a long time, Runari. You should be honored. You're the last of your little rebellion still standing." Zara's breath hitched. The last. She knew her people had suffered, but could it really be that bad? Xylox saw the doubt flicker in her eyes and smirked. "Oh, you didn't know." He leaned in closer. "Your little colony, the one you were trying to save, gone. My men found it days ago. There's nothing left but ashes." Zara's heart stopped. No, that couldn't be true. Kale, the elders, the children, all of them. A deep, aching cold settled in her chest. She had failed. Carter groaned, trying to push himself up. "You're lying," he spat, his voice raw. Xylox chuckled. "Am I? Let's find out." He gestured to the guards. "Take them to the viewing deck. Let them see for themselves." The energy field vanished. Before Zara could move, the guards yanked her up by her arms, dragging her and Carter toward the exit. Her mind was a storm of emotions. Despair, rage, doubt. If Tylox was telling the truth, what was left for her now? The viewing deck. They were shoved into a darkened command center, overlooking the massive black void of space. And there, floating before them, was the burning remains of her home. Zara staggered, her vision blurred. The planet was still there, but its surface was scared, smoking, broken. Cities reduced to rubble. Oceans turned to dust. A graveyard. Xylox stood beside her, his voice a cruel whisper. "You see now, there is nothing left. No colony, no home, no future." Zara stared. Her legs trembled. A deep, crushing weight settled in her chest. For years she had fought, survived, endured, all for the hope of seeing her people free again. Now there was no one left to save. Xylox leaned in, his forked tongue flickering. "I could end your suffering, give you a purpose." Zara didn't look at him, didn't breathe, didn't move. Carter did. With a sudden, violent snap, he turned and headbutted the nearest guard. The alien stumbled back, hissing in pain. Carter grabbed the plasma pistol from the guard's belt and fired. Boom! The room erupted into chaos. Zara snapped out of her daze just as Carter tossed her a weapon. Instinct took over. She caught the gun, spun, and fired a shot into the skull of the nearest soldier. The alarms blared. "Move!" Carter shouted. Zara didn't hesitate. Xylox lunged at her, but she twisted away, slashing her plasma blade across his arm. The commander let out a furious roar, his blood sizzling against the metal floor. Carter grabbed her wrist, dragging her toward the door. "We need to get to the hangar. Now." Guards poured into the room, plasma fire cutting through the air. Zura and Carter dove behind a metal console. "This is bad," Carter muttered. Zura's mind raced. They were outnumbered, trapped, and the ship was on full alert. Then she saw it. The main control panel. A reckless, insane idea formed in her mind. "Cover me," she ordered. Carter blinked. "Wait, what?" But she was already moving. Zura vaulted over the console, rolling as blaster fire scorched the floor beside her. She reached the control panel and slammed her fist against the override switch. The ship-wide comms activated. She didn't think. She spoke. "This is Zira of the Runari." Her voice echoed across the battleship. "To every captive on this ship, fight back. Now." For a second, there was silence. Then, a deafening explosion rocked the ship. The prisoners had heard her. The escape. The battleship shook as the revolt began. Prisoners broke free. Guards scrambled to contain the chaos. Carter grabbed Zura's hand. That was reckless. Zura smirked. That was necessary. Together, they ran through the burning corridors, dodging collapsing structures and plasma fire. The hangar was just ahead. Then, a massive shape stepped into their path. Xylox. Blood dripped from his wounded arm, but his eyes burned with fury. "You think you can escape me?" he growled. Zura and Carter raised their weapons, but Xylox was faster. With inhuman speed, he lunged forward, grabbing Zira by the throat and slamming her into the wall. She gasped, struggling against his grip. "You are nothing," he snarled. "Your people are nothing. And you." A gunshot. Xylox staggered. His grip loosened. Zira dropped to the ground, coughing, just in time to see Carter standing behind the commander, smoking gun in hand. Xylox looked down at the burning hole in his chest. He let out a slow, shuddering breath. Then he collapsed. Silence. Zira stared at the body, heart pounding. Carter exhaled. "Remind me to never piss you off." Zira smirked. "Took the words right out of my mouth." A blast door rumbled open ahead, revealing the hangar. The Nova Dawn was waiting. Zira and Carter sprinted forward, dodging incoming fire. The ship's ramp lowered, and the AI's voice crackled over the comms. "Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you board quickly. This ship is about to explode." Carter grabbed Zira's hand, pulling her onto the ramp as fire erupted behind them. They collapsed inside the cockpit as the doors sealed shut. Zira gasped for breath, her mind still spinning. She had lost everything, but she was still alive. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. A new future. The Nova Dawn rocketed through space, escaping the fiery wreckage of the Yelthrin battleship behind them. The ship trembled under the strain of the high-speed maneuver, but Zira barely noticed. She sat in the co-pilot's chair, her fingers digging into the armrests, her mind a storm. She had won, but at what cost? Her people were gone. Her homeworld was nothing but ash and ruins. There was nothing left. Nothing, except the human sitting beside her. Carter piloted with steady hands, his eyes scanning the controls, but his voice was quiet. "We should be in the clear soon." Zira barely nodded. She wasn't sure what she felt. Relief, grief, exhaustion. The silence stretched between them, the weight of everything finally crushing down. Then Luna, the ship's AI, spoke. "Captain, I'm detecting a priority distress signal." Carter frowned. "From who?" Luna's tone softened. "From a group of survivors. Runari." Zira's head snapped up. Her heart stopped. "Runari." "That's impossible," she whispered. Luna's holographic display flickered to life. A map appeared, showing a cluster of life signals on the outskirts of an uninhabited moon. "Impossible or not," Carter muttered, "they're out there." Zira could barely breathe. She had believed them all dead. Had Psylocke lied? Or had these Runari somehow escaped before the slaughter? It didn't matter. She wasn't alone. "Take us there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter glanced at her, then nodded. "Hang on." The Nova Dawn veered off course, setting its new destination. A new hope. The hidden survivors. The moon's surface was barren and cold, littered with jagged rock formations. The Nova Dawn landed in a small canyon, shielding itself from unwanted eyes. Zyra's heart pounded as she and Carter stepped onto the dusty ground. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. A small group of Runari survivors. Thin, wounded, but alive. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. She recognized one of them. Elias, one of the village elders. "Zyra," Elias's voice cracked with disbelief. His tired, golden eyes widened as he stepped closer. Zyra swallowed, suddenly unable to speak. She had thought she was the last. But here they were. "How?" she finally managed to ask. Elias's expression darkened. "We fled before the attack. We heard whispers of what was coming. We took what we could and ran." Zyra clenched her fists. So Psylocke had lied. He had wanted to break her, to take away any fight she had left. But he had failed. "We have no home left," Elias said quietly. "Nowhere to go." Zyra looked at Carter. Carter gave a small, knowing smile. "You could come with us." The elders murmured amongst themselves, uncertain. But Zyra was certain. For years, she had fought for a future that seemed impossible. Now, that future was real. She turned to Elias, her voice strong. "We're not running anymore." Elias's tired eyes shone with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. A future among the stars. As the Nova Dawn lifted off the barren moon, Zyra stood in the observation deck, staring at the stars. This wasn't the ending she had imagined. Her home was gone. Her people were scattered. But she was alive. And now she had a new mission. A new purpose. Beside her, Carter leaned against the rail. "So, what now?" Zyra exhaled. "Now, we find the rest of my people. We rebuild." Carter grinned. "Sounds like a plan." Zyra looked at him. Truly looked at him. The human who had stepped into her life and changed everything. Maybe she had lost a home. But she had found something else. Something worth fighting for. The Nova Dawn soared into the stars, toward a future unknown. But for the first time, in a long time, Zyra wasn't afraid. She was ready. The Nova Dawn soared through the endless sea of stars, carrying Zyra, Carter, and the last of the Runari toward an uncertain future. They had survived. They had fought. But the shadows still lurked beyond the edges of the known galaxy. A storm was coming. And this time, Zyra wouldn't just run. She would fight. For her people. For her future. For a new beginning. The end.